The carefully curated image of Mayor Tiffany Henyard, the smooth-talking, unshakable political figure, was crumbling in real time. Her rise to power, once wrapped in the promise of progress, was now unraveling under the weight of undeniable truth. She sat frozen in the courtroom. Her complexion was pale, her expression blank. Behind her, years of dominance, her face once plastered across billboards, her name hailed as the future of Dalton. But today, the truth stood taller than her reputation. The courtroom fell silent as the evidence rolled across the screen. Leaked emails, audio recordings, paper trails of taxpayer money being siphoned into luxury travel, and questionable projects. There was no denying it now. Dalton had been betrayed by its own mayor. Gasps echoed through the chamber, and among the stunned audience were the very residents who once believed in her. Now they looked on, not with confusion, but with heartbreak. And then the silence broke. Her fist slammed the table, rattling the microphones. Her chair screeched across the polished floor as she shot to her feet. "This is a setup!" she screamed, voice raw with rage. But the room wasn't buying it. A gavel pounded for order, but Henyard was unraveling. Pointing a trembling finger at the prosecutors, she shouted, "This is political! You don't want a strong woman!" The irony was deafening. A woman long accused of bullying staff, inflating salaries, and manipulating the system, now casting herself as the victim. It was classic Henyard: deflection over accountability, martyrdom over truth. In a final, desperate attempt to salvage her crumbling image, she turned on her own lawyers. "You were supposed to handle this," she snarled, venom dripping from every word. One attorney buried his face in paperwork. The other refused to meet her eyes. The illusion of control was gone. Her empire shattered. She had nothing left to spin. No one left to blame. Nowhere left to run. And yet, she tried. Ripping off her courtroom mic, she grabbed her designer handbag and stormed out. Gasps echoed through the chamber. Reporters scrambled. The crowd erupted in whispers. Applause even broke out in the back. Tiffany Henyard was fleeing. The once unstoppable super mayor was now a desperate figure, swallowed by her own downfall. Outside, chaos exploded. Reporters swarmed. Cameras flashed. Questions flew like bullets. "Mayor Henyard, do you have a comment on the leaked recordings? Is it true millions of taxpayer dollars are missing? Will you resign after today's hearing?" She said nothing. Jaw clenched, eyes forward, heels clicking furiously on the pavement. Her security detail struggled to push through, but the press tightened around her like a vice. Then, from the crowd, a voice rose above the noise. A woman stepped forward. It was Dalton's former treasurer, the same one who had resigned months earlier, accusing Henyard of unethical conduct and financial mismanagement. She didn't hesitate. She stood firm, face to face with the woman who once held all the power. "You think you can run from this, Tiffany?" she said, voice calm but sharp. "You think the truth won't follow you?" For the first time, Henyard looked rattled. This wasn't the media. This wasn't a prosecutor. This was someone who had been inside. Someone who knew. The cameras swung around. Reporters turned. The crowd went silent. This was no longer a court exit. It was a reckoning. And at the center stood Tiffany Henyard, once the face of Dalton's future, now the symbol of everything that went wrong. She had entered that courthouse with her chin high, flanked by lawyers, armored in arrogance. But now, she was exposed, deflated, cornered by a truth she could no longer outrun. The downfall was complete. But for Dalton, this wasn't just an end. It was the beginning of something new. Justice had arrived. The truth had spoken. And the people? They were finally reclaiming their town. The woman confronting her wasn't just a stranger. She was the very same person Henyard had once bullied, silenced, and threatened. But this time, the former treasurer didn't flinch. "You can run out of court," she shouted above the din. "But you can't run from the truth, Tiffany." Henyard froze. Her body stiffened. A visible crack spread through the polished mask she'd worn for years. The truth was catching up. But the treasurer wasn't done. "You silenced all of us," she said, her voice rising with the weight of the moment. "But guess what? You can't silence the truth." The crowd pressed in, tension thick in the air. Cameras rolled, microphones stretched forward, and Henyard, increasingly cornered, stepped forward. She leaned in close, too close, and in a low, threatening whisper, muttered something under her breath. But she had forgotten the world was watching. She underestimated the power of live streaming. The former treasurer turned to the cameras, a smirk tugging at her lips. "You heard that right. She just threatened me again." In an instant, the internet erupted. The hashtag Henyard threatened me began trending within minutes. Social media platforms lit up with reactions, commentary, and disbelief. The power dynamic had shifted. Tiffany Henyard was no longer the one in control. The truth had burst into the open, and the people of Dalton were no longer asking quietly. They were demanding answers. Back inside the courthouse, the proceedings pressed on without her. The veil had finally lifted. Secret backdoor deals Henyard had concealed for years were being dragged into the light. The prosecution presented its case with methodical precision. At the heart of it, $30 million in financial discrepancies. These, room filled with stunned gasps as the evidence grew more damning. "This is not just financial mismanagement," the lead prosecutor declared, his tone cold and unflinching. "This is full-blown embezzlement." The courtroom fell into a heavy silence. The weight of the revelation settled like fog. Shell companies, fake invoices, padded consulting fees. Every trail led straight back to Henyard and her tight-knit inner circle. And then came the revelation that shattered any remaining illusions. Luxury properties in distant states. Properties bought with funds meant for Dalton's infrastructure, emergency services, and education. Funds that were stolen. Whispers turned into a murmur as the question passed from one bench to another. Who owns these properties? The answer cut through the noise like a blade. Henyard's closest allies, political appointees, friends, confidants. Even her boyfriend, absent from the courtroom but now very much in the spotlight, was directly tied to several of the transactions. What had once been viewed as mere rumors of impropriety had exploded into a full-blown corruption scandal. The prosecution laid out the last of their evidence. It became undeniable. This wasn't incompetence. It was criminal. And Tiffany Henyard wasn't even present to defend herself. The judge, expression grave, struck his gavel. "It is within this court's power to authorize an official criminal investigation into Mayor Henyard's financial dealings," he announced, voice echoing through the tense room. The silence that followed wasn't just solemn. It was historic. An official investigation was now underway. And it wasn't just state level. The feds were stepping in. Outside the courthouse, the reaction was electric. News spread like wildfire. Cheers broke out. "Lock her up! We finally got her!" the crowd roared. Dalton's residents, long silenced and pushed to the sidelines, had found their voice. It was justice in motion. Years of murmurs and suspicions now had proof. Henyard's empire, once towering, intimidating, and seemingly untouchable, was collapsing before everyone's eyes. Meanwhile, just a few blocks away, Henyard remained unaware of the courtroom bombshell. Surrounded by press, she still believed she could control the narrative, twist the optics, cast herself as the wronged hero. She didn't yet know the ground beneath her had already given way. Inside her car, her phone buzzed. She stared at the screen. One of her most trusted advisors. She hesitated, jaw tightening, before answering. "What?" she snapped, Her voice strained with frustration. A frantic voice came through, barely keeping composure. "Madam Mayor, it's bad. Real bad." She felt a chill creep up her spine. "How bad?" A pause. Then the words that shattered everything. "The investigation. It's federal. They're coming after you." Her heart stuttered. Federal charges. Not just a political scandal. This wasn't about saving her reputation anymore. This was about saving her freedom. The facade was gone. The walls were closing in. And for Tiffany Henyard, there was no more running, no more spinning, no more deflecting. This was the end. Henyard exhaled slowly, trying to steady herself. The weight of it all pressed down like 1,000 bricks. For the first time in her career, there was nowhere left to run, no spin to apply, no narrative to control. The truth had finally caught up with her. Her phone buzzed relentlessly. Calls she couldn't answer, messages she didn't want to see. Her carefully crafted world, the empire she built on dominance, manipulation, and fear, was collapsing faster than she could process. Inside the courthouse, the judge's decision rang out with finality. The investigation was greenlit. The truth had been confirmed, laid bare for the public to witness. There would be no more political games, no backdoor deals to suppress what had been unearthed. Tiffany Henyard's hold on power, once ironclad, was over. The people of Dalton were free from her grip, free from the fear that had defined her administration for far too long. Outside, the energy was electric. The chants grew louder, echoing through the streets. A chorus of justice long denied, but finally arriving. And there sat Henyard in her car, frozen as the sound of the crowd reached her ears, cheering, chanting, celebrating her fall from grace. The roar grew with every second, a crashing wave of voices that reminded her she was no longer in control. The very people she once commanded now demanded her accountability. And then, a reporter's voice pierced through the broadcast. "You're saying Mayor Henyard directly threatened you?" The disbelief was audible. The whistleblower didn't flinch. Her voice was steady, resolute. "Not just me. Anyone who got in her way." Gasps spread through the newsroom as she reached into her purse and pulled out a small black recorder, holding it up for the cameras. "I have proof," she declared. The silence that followed was deafening. For a moment, the entire media world stood still. There it was, undeniable evidence, a symbol of resistance against the intimidation Henyard had wielded for years. The woman who had silenced critics, bullied colleagues, and ruled with fear, was now facing those she once tried to destroy. And they weren't backing down. Inside the courthouse, the prosecution didn't hesitate. The proof only bolstered their case. The final threads of Henyard's defense were unraveling. The request for a full-scale investigation into her financial dealings was officially granted. The whispers had turned into declarations. The reckoning had arrived. And Henyard, she stood at the eye of the storm, stripped of power, stripped of allies, and now stripped of the illusion of invincibility. Once untouchable, she now faced the full force of state and federal authorities. Every questionable deal, every shady contract, every stolen dollar would be dragged into the light. Her reign, once so feared, now looked pitiful in its collapse. Outside, the crowd surged. People filled the courthouse steps, waving signs, chanting her name, not in admiration, but in fury. It was a moment of release, of triumph, of reclaiming a town that had been taken from them. The downfall of Tiffany Henyard wasn't just political, it was personal for Dalton. It was a wound being cauterized by truth and accountability. And, as Henyard sat in her car, face pale, fingers trembling, the truth settled in like a final verdict. She was alone. Completely. Finally. Irrevocably alone. And nothing. Not her title. Not her bravado. Not her power. Could protect her from what was coming next. "Lock her up!" they chanted, holding signs demanding accountability. Their voices rose in unison, twisting Henyard's own campaign slogan into a brutal commentary on her years of corruption. The energy was electric. The people of Dalton were celebrating what they had longed for, a chance at justice. Just when Henyard thought things couldn't get worse, they did. The first arrest warrant was issued, but not for her. It was for someone very close to her, her top financial advisor. Reporters scrambled, confirming the breaking news. Sources revealed authorities had issued the warrant for this high-ranking member of Henyard's administration. Then came the real shock. The FBI was now involved. The investigation had gone federal. Panic gripped Tiffany as she turned to her lawyer. Her voice was tight with desperation. "Fix this," she demanded. But instead of responding with the usual confidence, her lawyer gave her a look that spoke volumes. It was a look that said, "Even I can't save you now." At that moment, Tiffany Henyard fully grasped the gravity of her situation. She was no longer in control. The days of dodging accountability, of brushing off accusations with a smile, and of intimidating critics into silence were over. Her political empire, built on shady deals and corruption, was unraveling, and the people of Dalton, the same people she had crushed under her boot for so long, were now celebrating. Outside her car, the crowd's chants grew louder, a chorus of justice. Henyard, frozen in her seat, could only watch as her world crumbled around her. This wasn't just another PR nightmare. This was the end. The very people she had deceived, manipulated, and discarded were finally seeing justice served. For years, Henyard had used her position for personal gain, disregarding the people she was meant to serve. But now, the reckoning had come, and there was no escape. As the investigation deepened, the next question on everyone's mind was whether this was just the beginning. The financial probe was still unfolding, and with the FBI now involved, the scope of the investigation had expanded. Authorities were closing in on her every move. More arrests seemed inevitable. People close to Henyard had begun flipping, providing crucial information that only made her situation worse. The question now was whether Tiffany Henyard would try to cut a deal to save herself, or make one last desperate attempt to escape before the hammer truly dropped. Time was running out, and her options were quickly dwindling. The people of Dalton, those who had been deceived and manipulated for so long, watched with growing anticipation. This wasn't just another political scandal. This was the long-awaited reckoning. Would Henyard face the consequences of her actions, or would she attempt a final escape? The clock was ticking. Tiffany Henyard could no longer hide behind the web of lies and manipulation that had once protected her. The truth had come for her, and this time there was no escaping it.